gluttons for punishment. You're back again for the second time in 2 weeks. Today, as you notice, our topic of study is Buddhism. I know that in your bulletin it says we are looking at Judaism today, but the only reason I can give you is that I goofed and I didn't realize that we are supposed to be studying Buddhism today. And I was actually hoping not to speak about Buddhism when the Frankls are here, because the last thing you want is an expert to correct an amateur, but I guess I'll have to see if I can move Buddhism around. Okay, see what happens with me? All right, so we are looking at Buddhism today. For those of you who were not here last week, we covered Hinduism, and in a sense it makes sense for us to have Buddhism followed directly on a lecture in Hinduism, because a sense of interconnectedness there is between these two religions. One grew out of the other. In a sense, it is a little bit like the fact that we cannot understand Christianity unless you understand the essence of Judaism, because Judaism is a religion which is the origin of Christianity and of Islam in a certain way. So we're going to look at Buddhism today, and the first thing I wanted to begin by telling you is that it is Buddhism, not Buddhism as you Americans are prone to call it. It's not Buddhism, it's Buddhism. My religions professor at Princeton would often call me out and say, "Mr. Sojwal, would you please articulate that name for all of us so that we can understand it?" The interesting thing about Sanskrit, and from which Hindi and Pali, the languages in which the Buddhist scriptures have been written, is that there are 3 distinct sounds that are transliterated D in English. One is the sound, the as in the definite article in English, the. There is the sound, which is the as in drum. And then there is the third, the sound, which is the one that we use for Buddha. Okay, so the word is Buddha. I understand my learned friend Josh telling me that it is aspirational, did you say? Aspirational, as in the D sound. It's a reflexive, aspirational sound. And it comes to us from the word Bodhi, which has a couple of different meanings. The Bodhi is the one who has attained salvation, but there is also another meaning for that word, which is the Bodhi tree, which is a banyan tree that flourishes in subtropical climates like India. The Bodhi tree under which the Buddha actually attained nirvana or salvation. As I was, can I have a music stand so I can put this on? Buddhism dates back to at least, we are not very clear in terms of chronology here, but our understanding is that Buddhism dates back to at least the 5th century BC or BCE. Thank you. Remember, at this time, by this time, Hinduism had already been in existence for 2,000 years or longer. But in the 5th century BCE is when our interest begins, when we come up with the person of Buddha, which we will get to in a second. There are about 320 million Buddhists around the world. About 4% of the population, of the world's population is Buddhist. It is a religion that spread from India to the east, so that today, as we know, that to a large extent, a large number of countries in the east are Buddhist, from Japan to China to Vietnam to Cambodia to Laos to Burma to all that particular swath of Southeastern Asia is largely Buddhist. The texts in which the story of Buddhism, the tenets and the principles of Buddhism have been written in are in multiple languages, primarily Sanskrit, which was the sort of lingua franca of India for the longest time. But specific to that particular area where the Buddha began, it is in the language which is now non-existent, the language of Pali. You also see Buddhist texts written in Chinese, in Mandarin, in Cantonese, and also in the Tibetan language, which is distinct from Chinese. So roughly around 563 BC is when a man by the name of Gautama Siddhartha was a prince in an area called Lumbini, which actually is in Nepal today. At that particular time, if you can construct a rough map of India, India included all of Bangladesh, of Nepal, of Pakistan, and of parts of Afghanistan. So it was a much larger country than it is today. And so Gautama Siddhartha was actually born in what is now Nepal. And there are legends around that. We don't really know for sure. Scholars are a little torn over the story of the origin of the Buddha. But the popular legend says that Gautama Siddhartha was a prince in the royal family in Lumbini, now in Nepal. And that, as was typical of that particular time, he grew up in a very sheltered, isolated palace. He had little interaction with the outside, and again, according to legend, he, at the age of 29, decided that he needed to venture outside of his comfort zone, and so he summons his charioteer and he rides outside the palace, outside the isolation to which he was used to. And in doing so, having entered into the rest of the kingdom, he comes across four particular experiences called the four sights that he experiences. First of all, he sees a sick man along the roadside, and he is not quite sure why this man was struggling to walk, and he asks his charioteer, "What's wrong with him?" And his charioteer says, "He is sick." And having never come across illness or sickness before, I did tell you that it was legend to construct the story of Buddha, he is astonished to believe that at certain times people fall sick. He went a little further, he saw an old man, and he said, "Why is that man all bent up and gray-haired?" And he says he is old. He goes a little further and he sees a corpse being carried in a funeral procession. And he says, "What happened to that man?" He's told, "The man is dead. He is being taken so that he can be cremated and his ashes scattered in the Ganges River." These three sights supposedly gave to Gautama Siddhartha an experience of life which he says is characterized by what he calls dukkha, literally meaning suffering. So the legend states that the Buddha was completely unaware of a condition where people actually suffer. But having encountered it, this becomes a primary theme of his life. Why is there suffering in the world? For those of you who are aware, there's a major Christian doctrine of theodicy, which we are still struggling with to understand. Why do bad things happen? It goes on to say, why do bad things happen to good people in theodicy? But that particular experience of suffering as a part of life has a searing impact on this young man, on Gautama. And having experienced that particular walk, he, we are told, leaves his wife Yashodhara and his son Rahul. He forsakes the kingdom that he was going to inherit from his father, and he goes along the way of the fourth sight. The fourth sight being that having seen a sick man, an old man, a dead man, the Buddha sees an ascetic, a monk, walking along the streets, and he asks his charioteer, what is that man up to? Why is he walking practically naked with no belongings on him? And his charioteer tells him, he is a man who is seeking after salvation, and he has forsaken the ways of the world, and he has chosen to live as an ascetic. The Buddha having experienced, or at this time Gautama, having experienced this experience of suffering in the lives of others, chooses to become an ascetic, a monk. And we are told that for the next 50 years, he wanders. He goes from place to place. If you go to parts of North and Northeastern India, there are many places which are major Buddhist pilgrimage sites because history or legend has it that the Buddha stopped in this particular place. Until he arrived in a city called Gaya, which still exists in the state of Odisha in eastern India. And having arrived in the city of Gaya, he takes his place at the foot of this banyan tree, the Bodhi tree, and having arrived there and meditated there for years, possibly decades, he ultimately experiences nirvana, a concept that we will go back to in a second. Soon after having achieved nirvana, the Buddha begins to preach, and he collects groups of people who are attracted to his philosophy, and that is the philosophy that we are now going to get into. A quick moment for any interruption, if you would like, before we move on. Questions or comments? Okay, you had your chance. The Buddha's name is intrinsically linked to another name, a name which most Indians know well. It's a name of the Emperor Ashoka. Ashoka lived roughly around the 3rd century BCE, and he was the emperor of at that time, the Mauryan kingdom, the largest kingdom in North India at that time. Excuse me. Emperor Ashoka was supposedly a violent man. He ruled over this large kingdom, and during his time, he waged wars against multiple opposing kingdoms and won major battles against them. In the 3rd century BCE, Emperor Ashoka, having conquered most of North India, launches a fight against the neighboring kingdom of Kalinga, today in eastern India, and we are told that he fights a brutal battle with the people of Kalinga. And the word is that over 100,000 men were were killed in battle. And we are told that having won the battle, Ashoka, the emperor, walks onto the battlefield and he sees these corpses of men strewn over a field, and he spends the entire day walking from one corpse to another. And seeing that particular blood-drenched sight, he comes to a major conversion in his life. And he acknowledges and recognizes his sinfulness in the way in which he has waged war that has led to the killing of 100,000 men. And at that point we are told that Emperor Ashoka converts to Buddhism. As we will see, Buddhism is a religion that's deeply steeped in the philosophy of, anybody? Ahimsa. Himsa is to kill. Ahimsa is to not kill. It was a philosophy that also propelled another major Indian figure, Mahatma Gandhi, who fought his battle for freedom on the concept of ahimsa. So that whole notion of non-violent, non-cooperation, where Gandhi would send tens of men to go to places where the British were holding their lathis or their sticks to beat people, and Gandhi would send 10 people at a time and they would all get whacked on the head and fall, and then he would send 10 other people to go and meet the same fate. It is that philosophy of Gandhi's that ultimately, of course, became very attractive to Martin Luther King, who built on that same philosophy. Ahimsa is not necessarily intrinsic to Buddhism. There are concepts of it in Hinduism as well. But Buddhism takes it to a different level, where it becomes the basic bedrock of the faith. At all times, you are meant to do no harm to others. There are two major strands in Buddhism, and I'll just give you a very quick overview of them. The first is called Theravada Buddhism. And in Theravada Buddhism, which literally means the school of the elders, the school where you listen to what the elders are saying, it emphasizes that notion of nirvana. Now, we're not talking about Kurt Cobain here, but nirvana is essentially, for those of you who were here last week, the basic Hindu philosophy, which also forms a backdrop of Buddhism, is that you and I are caught in the cycle of samsara, or reincarnation. You and I are caught in this cycle of reincarnation. We are living on this earth, we live for 80 or whatever years, we die, and then we are reborn again. And the concept of that is connected to samsara is, of course, again what we worked on last week, is karma. Your karma determines the particular body that you will inhabit in your reincarnated self. If you have done good, if you have done well, if you've lived a morally upright life, you have a chance of becoming, of being reborn into a higher position in life. And according to basic Hindu philosophy, you cannot achieve nirvana, which is an escape from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. You cannot achieve nirvana. Sorry, I spelled that wrong, right? Unless you're a Brahmin, unless you belong to the uppermost caste. That's what Hinduism believes. In Buddhism, the sense is that you do well in life to ultimately escape samsara, which is the cycle of birth, death and rebirth, and your karma determines how you will be born. So literally in Hindu and in Buddhist philosophy, for those people who are evil, who've lived lives that are immoral, are destined to come back in their next life as a lower being. There are Hindus who are fascinated by the fact that they believe that in their previous life they were ants or elephants or monkeys or whatever else. Yeah? You could come back as a considerably lower human as well, as long as your sins were not as bad that required you to come back as an ant. Because life is precious, and life can only be lived fully, morally, in order to be able to achieve that state of nirvana. So there is a deep sense of longing for salvation that is endemic to Buddhism and to Hinduism. There's another religion in India with fewer adherents called Jainism, which follows similar philosophy but is distinct in other ways. Coming back to Ashoka again, Ashoka determines that as a converted man who is now a Buddhist, he becomes the missionary king. He decides that he wants to export his religion throughout the land of India and beyond. It was Ashoka who is the primary reason why there are Buddhists in Japan, in China, in Vietnam, in Laos, and the other countries that we mentioned earlier. He decides to become a missionary of the Buddhist faith. This was very unusual because Hinduism is not at heart a missionary religion. Hinduism does not require or long, at least classically, to convert people to their faith the way our religion does. Christianity is a deeply evangelistic and missionary religion. I am a Christian because Christian missionaries came in the 1800s to India to convert Indians to Christianity. Actually, they came earlier than that, but I am not Roman Catholic. If I was Roman Catholic, I could claim that Christianity, that my forebears became Christian when Vasco da Gama found his way around the Cape of Good Hope and landed in India, in Goa, back in the 16th century. My ancestors were converted by British and American missionaries in the early to mid 19th century. Bill. Thomas Christians go back even further. There's a strong legend, or I shouldn't say legend because people take objection to that. There's a strong sense of Christianity being present in India all the way back to the time of Jesus, or soon after the death of Jesus, death and resurrection of Jesus, because there's a strong tradition in India that says that St. Thomas, the disciple who said, "Unless I put my hand in his hand and feel his side, I will not believe," and that he came to India as a result of that. There's no definitive proof that Thomas came to India. These kind of things are hard to prove, but we do know that there were major migrations from Syria in the 3rd and then again in the 5th century AD when Christianity was established in India. But back to Ashoka, he decides that his religion is a superior religion. He brings about tremendous transformation. He builds monasteries. By some accounts, 80,000 monasteries in India. And he sends missionaries to Sri Lanka, and then to Burma, and then on to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And later on, these missionaries also went into China and to Japan. Now, Buddhism is not a sort of a monolith as a religion. As you know, if you are aware of Japan, for instance, and I know there are Japanese experts here, people who've lived there, Japanese Buddhism is very different from the Buddhism of Richard Gere. You know, he's a famous Buddhist, right? But so Shintoism, which is an amalgam of, that is unique to Japan, Chinese Buddhism is pretty distinct. Tibetan Buddhism is very different and distinct as well. There are, some people would say there are more like Buddhisms than a monolithic religion called Buddhism. Because unlike Christianity and Islam, these are not creedal religions. As I mentioned last week, Hinduism has no founder. You know, you look at Judaism and you can see Abraham is the one who becomes the spearhead of Judaism, also of Christianity and Islam. Jesus was the founder of Christianity, though he did not intend to begin a new religion. But Hinduism has no founder, no particular sect, no particular set creed that one needs to subscribe to. And Buddhism in that sense is similar, even though it does have a founder and it has multiple texts in multiple languages, these are not creedal religions. When we look at Islam, we will see that all you have to do to become a Muslim is to say the Shahada. La ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah. There is one God and Muhammad is his prophet. That makes you a Muslim if you say it with conviction and meaning. For Christians, the rite of initiation is baptism, right? You are formally dunked in the water or sprinkled on with the words, I now baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and you are a Christian. Buddhism doesn't quite have a similar expectation of that. Back again to Theravada that I was talking about. Theravada, the school of the elders, believes that one's purpose in life is to experience nirvana, to escape the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The other part of Buddhism is called Mahayana, which literally means the great vehicle. And this is a distinct part of it because it believes in Bodhi. I know it's a mouthful. I'm just going to leave it there. It's Bodhisattva, which is that there are certain people who strive for nirvana, to experience and escape from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, but they choose not to become a part of their eternal being, but stay back in order that they might save others. Stay back in order that they might be able to help others experience salvation. And so that was Buddha's notion, that his followers should be a people who are dedicated to committing themselves to see others also experience nirvana. This is what propels Buddhism's evangelistic work, if you will, its missionary work, its desire to propagate the faith to peoples across the world. And so, Theravada is largely confined to the south, to the Indian subcontinent, which is India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and a little further out to Burma or Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. Mahayana, which is the greater vehicle, which believes that there are sentient beings. These are beings who are committing themselves to fight for, or not fight, but to invite others to experience salvation or nirvana. And this is the kind of Buddhism that you see primarily in China and Japan, and in even though there are other schools that have emerged as a result of the propagation of Mahayana Buddhism, particularly in Buddhism that you see in like Zen Buddhism, which the West has imported in bits and pieces and has used it as it would like, but we would all want to be a little more Zen in our understanding. I want to just quickly go back to some of the concepts that are common to Buddhism as well as to Hinduism. I mentioned the words karma earlier, and in our last class we talked about another crucial um, concept of Hinduism, which is dharma, which is it's hard to translate because it has multiple meanings, but primarily it is to do your duty, to stay in your lane, to fulfill the purpose for which you were created. And that is, of course, something that gives into the caste system that we talked about last week, which is it is inappropriate for a cobbler to seek to become someone who works with someone who goes to fight wars, because that is stepping outside of his lane, and therefore he is doing a dharma if he were to do something that was different from what the caste dictated that he do. Buddhists also use mantras. Mantras are chants which are used in meditative practices. For those of you who do yoga, there are mantras which are sometimes said so that even as you put your body through a physical exercise, your mind is reciting these chants, these holy sayings that are salvific in them, that actually enable you to draw closer to the nirvana that you so long for. We also talked about yoga. Yoga is literally exercise, but it's both a physical and a mental exercise. In fact, it's an exercise you do in combination, not simply to have a six-pack, but literally to be able to ultimately achieve nirvana. Yoga draws you closer to recognizing that even as you learn to breathe right and to do the downward dog, ultimately your intention is to become integrated into that supreme being that you are a part of. A big question that is, yeah. Yeah, well, so we are not going to delve very deep into yoga, but yeah, so yoga essentially believes that your body is, what's the easiest way to say, where is Flavio when I need him, right? But if you actually sat next to Flavio while he is teaching yoga, he does these sudden breaths. I'm not exaggerating. You know that, right, Mary? Right, breath fire. I mean, he can go for 10 minutes doing I'm not even kidding you. I mean, it's a little scary. You feel like, for one thing I can say, I can't do that for more than 30 seconds max. How does this man do it so well? But the sense is that breath inhaled and exhaled is a part of the purging that your body needs. There's both a physical and a spiritual purging that's happening. But that's only a slice of it. But since we are not going to be delving much into yoga, we'll have Flavio for that. Yoga is an exercise. It's a medium through which, one of the many mediums through which you are working towards salvation. But here's something that's distinct to Buddhism. In Islam, you look at Allah. In Christianity, you look at Jesus. In Hinduism, you see a plethora of gods and goddesses. Buddhism is a godless religion. There is no God you're worshiping. The essential tenet of Buddhism is peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Peace comes from within. Because it is propelled by that sense that suffering is such an endemic part of one's human existence, we need to find a solace or satisfaction for that suffering only from within. And so, in keeping with that, we have what in Buddhism is called, um, let me just go back, excuse me. Yes, we're going to come to that in a second. But is Buddhism really a religion? Can there be a religion where no God is worshipped and where there's no sense of a being towards whom we should be bowing our heads and our hearts? Some Buddhists will say that it's actually scientific. But the essence of Buddhism is that there are these things that propel Buddhism. You have to live a morally upright life. You have to be mindful. Remember that word? It actually comes from deep within Buddhism. If you've done any meditative practices, if you've done yoga, being mindful of where you are and is the most important thing. Be mindful of both your thoughts and your actions. It is also to develop wisdom and understanding. The idea that as we grow physically in age, we can also grow in a state of wisdom and of understanding. And so, like I said about Hinduism, Buddhists will say that Buddhism is not a religion, it's more a way of life that you adapt yourself to. If philosophy means the love of wisdom, which is what philo and sophia mean, then Buddhism really is a philosophy because it believes that through wisdom and understanding you are able to ultimately attain to that salvation that you long for. But the Buddha came up with what he called the Four Noble Truths. Buddhists believe that the reality of life is that suffering is endemic to the human condition. We all suffer. Having said that, it then goes on to say that suffering is caused by yearning or cravings. We crave as human beings. We long for, we yearn. And it is this yearning, this longing, that is the reason for our suffering. You can see the sense in that. Just consider how we live our lives and see that our lives are driven by consumption and by yearning for what we don't have. There are good things about yearnings. They actually lead to ambition and to fulfillment and to actions that lead to that. But Buddhism says craving is the problem, our longing for that which we do not have. The third truth is that both suffering and craving can be overcome. You can overcome craving and longing and yearning, and that will reduce or eliminate suffering in your life, because all suffering is connected to attachments. When you are too attached to someone or something, then you live a life of suffering. If only you are able to give up longing and yearning, you can live a self-satisfied life. And the fourth truth of that is that the way to overcome it is by following what is called the 8 Noble Paths. And that's what we're going to come to next. Again, questions, thoughts, comments? Four noble paths. Pardon my pronunciation. So is what? How typically, classically, how Western of you to say that? How utterly consumeristic and materialistic of you to say that. Yeah, so we will say, forget about craving, just go out and get it. As soon as you get it, then you're happy. We lived in New York for a long time, and one of the things that they talk about in some circles is the number. The number. If you're working on Wall Street, the number. How much money do you really want in your life that will enable you to believe that you can retire and retire early and live a fulfilled life? The problem with that number is it's ever elusive, right? The minute you get to that $1 million that you long for, you realize that $1 million doesn't even give you a middle-class lifestyle in parts of the country like California. So that number keeps shifting. The Buddha is saying that at heart, the longing that you have for is not satisfiable. You will never get there. And so, unless you eliminate the notion of craving and yearning in your life, you will always live a life of suffering. And I think we all can understand that truth. So yeah, you say, why don't you just go out and get it? Well, the problem is the minute you get it, it's not enough. It's not fulfilling. It's not averting the suffering that you're trying to. And so, because of that ever elusive nature, you're always going to be dissatisfied. You're always going to be suffering. He says, you need to have right view. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but just take this in, if you will, because there are 8 of them. You have to have the right view of reality and the truth of suffering. When you have the right view, it's helpful. Right resolve. Make the right kinds of commitments in your life, resolutions in your life. Right speech. There's a lot of morality that's deeply embedded in Buddhism. Right speech is important. Right actions. Speech and actions go together. Right livelihood. Engage your life in a profession or a vocation that is ultimately life-giving to others and not just selfishly driven. The right effort to work hard and to persevere. Right mindfulness. Deeply Buddhist thought. In every moment, live as if this is the last moment of your life. Live in the fullness of this particular spot or time in your life. And then finally, the right samadhi, which is the right meditations that lead you to a place where you yearn no more and you live a satisfied life. Yeah. How so?
Because we're always looking to the future, to heaven, and living in the moment, we don't seem to celebrate here in church the same way. That's just my thought. So.
Yeah, I think there's some meaning to that. I would say that one of the ways in which you recognize what true mindfulness is this. We spend far too much of our life regretting the past or fearing the future. And these two ideas are what destroy our ability to live in the fullness of time now, today. If you would only stop regretting, and if you would only stop fearing, you would do well to live more fully in the moment. And I think there's an overlap. I think Christianity believes that true. I would vaguely disagree with you over whether we are simply longing for heaven, because I think there's a notion in incorrect Christian theology which believes that we are ultimately built for the other world. And I think everything that Jesus has to say is no. Our life is to be lived fully now. Eternity is not something that begins when we die. Eternity begins when we are baptized. So every moment of our life now counts, which is why we go and stand in support of our brothers and sisters who are being hurt. We don't go preach the gospel to them. We don't tell them to convert to Christianity and get baptized. We say, you are in trouble right now. We want to find ways of helping you. Yeah. There's an element of that, yeah.
I just want to say that for me, this concept has been an evolution. I was certainly taught that, we're looking for life hereafter constantly, that forward thinking. And I experienced, even in the Episcopal Church, or maybe it's because I came to California, but that the theology was much more about the present, was, the kingdom of God is at hand. So at least my experience in the United States is that it has to do with what I was taught in Sunday school versus sort of how I've experienced the Episcopal Church, even in its teachings, having moved. But like I said, maybe it's because I moved.
You're right. I mean, I think there is I think a lot of us have grown up in Sunday school and been taught the idea that heaven awaits us. And so our job is to live our life until we die, because that's when the fullness and the richness of life will be lived in the fulfillment. I don't deny that reality. Yes, I know. Margaret is leaving, not because she's mad at me. So the idea is not that we are simply postponing our true joy, which will happen only in the world to come. But the real purpose of our life is today. That is why Jesus spent time with the poor and the needy. It was not enough for him to preach the kingdom of God. It was important for him to heal them, to cure them, to give them the ability to be reintegrated into society from which they were estranged. So there is a commitment to today. If we have that otherworldly attitude about religion, about eternity, we are missing out on the essence of the Christian faith. God is not telling you that your true life awaits you after you die. God is telling you this is your true life. Live fully now, today. And then, if you're committed to the right things, you will ultimately be led to the truth.
Just quickly, I wanted to add, because a compliment that I am hearing in my head that I got as a child, if you did something well or correctly or helped someone, the phraseology is, oh, you put another crown, another star in your crown in heaven. It's like another brownie point. Yeah, for the future. It's like, what?
Yeah. I think all of us have suffered from bad theology that we've been taught by well-meaning people. But I think there's so much of a recovery of that is happening. I mean, if you go a little further into that rabbit hole, I can tell you that this notion of heaven is as an otherworldly place, a world that lies somewhere out there in the sky, is unbiblical. If you've read a theologian by the name of N.T. Wright, he speaks so much about the fact that this is a world for which Jesus came and died and rose again for. It is this world that is been propelled by God at work, which means that the growth of science and technology, the alleviation of people out of poverty, the hope that drives all of us to live lives that will bring about peace and justice in our world is not something that God is going to cut off at the end of time, but that it is in this world that heaven will exist in the days to come as well. So one of the ways in which I would talk to my former parish in New York was that one day when I'm riding the subway in New York City, I expect to bump into Abraham and Moses. And I expect them to be wearing a two-piece suit and carrying a briefcase and heading out to work in the financial district of Manhattan. Because God is committed to this work. The fundamental scripture that drives us Christians is, for God so loved this world, not some other world. And so, as N.T. Wright would put it, this is heaven. This is the world in which we will live for all eternity, but will be fully actualized and realized, and there'll be a true fullness that will come to life here today.
Go back to your lecture on Buddhism.
Yes. Coming back to Buddhism, one of the things that we see today is the rise of Buddhist nationalism. And for those of you who know that the tenets of the Buddhist faith are so deeply committed to ahimsa, to nonviolence, to doing good for people, the notion of violent Buddhism is anachronistic. And yet the reality is that there have been violent Buddhist uprisings in our world at this time. For instance, Sri Lanka is a largely Buddhist country. Unfortunately, the way the religions are split in Sri Lanka is that the native Sinhalese people of Sri Lanka are mostly either Buddhists or Catholics, and Hindus, because there were Indians who migrated to Sri Lanka and lived there in fairly large numbers. They are a minority, but they're a large minority. And there have been increasing clashes that have happened between Sinhalese Buddhists and Hindu Indians who have lived there for many, many generations. And that has led to images of monks wearing their monastic robes and carrying swords and guns and going to fight against the Hindus. Nationalism like that has spread. We see it in Myanmar. The Burmese government largely is Buddhist in essence, and today we are seeing the oppression of the what people? The Rohingya people, who are Muslims but ethnic Burmese and have lived in Burma for hundreds of years. And so the Burmese military junta and Burmese followers of Buddhism have attacked these Muslims and have sought to drive them out of the country. We have seen aspects of such nationalism rise in Cambodia and in Laos as well, largely Buddhist countries where violent Buddhism is on the rise. Often because there is a sense that there is a connection between Buddhism and the people of the land. Sri Lankans will say to you that the way of justifying it is that the Sinhalese, who are Buddhists, are the only true Sri Lankans. Ring a bell, those of you who were here last week? That's exactly how the Hindu nationalist movement in India today is propagating its values. Basically saying only Hindus are truly Indians, because these Muslims, these Christians are not loyal to this land because they look to a God who is outside of this country. That sense of an identity that blurs religion and nationalism is become dangerous and is becoming more and more evident in different parts of the world, including our own. Thank you. Including our own, where the Christian nationalists, which we will look at in our final lecture, are becoming really strong in this country, where to be an American is to be Christian. And so if Zohran Mamdani rises to become the mayor of the greatest city in America, we are selling ourselves out. That is why we have a president who trashes the mayor of London because he is a Muslim, even though both New York and London are amongst the most multi-ethnic, multi-religious cities on earth. Any final thought or question? Yeah, Bill.
So a lot of what you spoke about is living a moral life. Is that different than what a Christian would view as a moral life?
Great point. If you will give me 3 more minutes. I will say at heart that Christianity is not a moral religion. Christianity does not see living a moral life as the be-all and end-all of the Christian faith. I will say that Christianity essentially emphasizes in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus that we are all immoral. All have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God. And the wages of sin is death. And the very purpose of Jesus coming to this world was to save us from our sin so that we would be freed to live lives that acknowledge our brokenness at all times. When Christianity becomes a moralizing force, when the essence of Christianity for you and I becomes, well, I have to live a morally upright life, it becomes moralistic, which means I have the power to become a moral person in and of myself. which goes against the Christian faith, which says, no, you will fail. You are an immoral person. You are not capable of living a morally upright life. It is only through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus that you acknowledge your weakness and you lean more on God. And so I'm not saying that Christianity propagates immorality. I'm saying Christianity is at essence not a moralizing religion, which is different.
But you, Christianity is yes, you fail, but you try to stay on the path of being godlike. So to me, I see all these religions having some basic essence of living a good, moral, peaceful life, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism. Basically, it's people thinking that they want to be a good human, peaceful, non-violent. I mean, it's kind of, there's so much similarity between religions.
Yes, I think I would say on the face of it, all religions are similar because they sort of long for all of us to become morally upright people who have the right values at heart. I'm saying, not to contradict you, but I'm saying as a corollary to that, Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism will say your capacity to live a moral life depends upon you. You can aspire to and seek to live a better life. Christianity says when Jesus becomes the central focus of your life, you begin to recognize that. So here's the difference. I want to be a moral person and then God will love me is a concept that is embedded in much of the Christian faith, right? God will like me more if I live a morally upright life. And Christianity says God loves you because you are made by Him in His image, and God cannot but love you. But when you come into an encounter with the living God, you are propelled to live a life that is godly and God ordained and God directed. At essence, yeah. You can. The question, the statement that Sandy is making is that Buddhism says. Can you say it loudly?
Yeah, so basically what I was asking, I was trying to contrast what Milind was just saying about Christianity with, tell us what in Buddhism is the contrast to that. And I was speculating that in the search for nirvana, that you do have the possibility of living a moral life.
Yes.
And that's important.
Yes. As I said in my, what should have been my opening statement, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. In Buddhism, the philosophy is the way to find and overcome suffering and the pain of death is the answer lies within you. Christianity says the answer lies in a God who loves you recklessly. And when you encounter Him, your life is transformed into seeking to do what He would do and into longing to become what He wants you and I to be.
Well, this probably should be tabled for the Christianity discussion, but, and what about the philosophy that of the soul, that is God within us, or at least a way to connect ourselves? Um, Jungian psychology says the soul with a small s, with, if you will, the spirit in the sky. That this is the root, but there is that essence of God within all of us. So it seems like is that more of a amalgam that has come more with modernity?
Your idea of tabling it for Christian conversation on Christianity sounds good. I am.
Put that on the book, whiteboard. Okay.
I'm acutely aware that lunch awaits you all, as it does me. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.